Welcome to the Tech Geeks video. Today we're going to be looking at how to secure your WatchGuard. I think this is probably going to take me between 30 and 45 minutes. I'm not going to go into every single detail of the WatchGuard. There's plenty to learn. It's a firewall, all right? But this principle will work across the whole WatchGuard range, and it's going to just basically show you how to take this out of the box and to put it into a secure and ready-to-use condition in your network. So, by default, your firewall is going to have a LAN IP of 10.0.1.1. Please be aware that by default DHCP is turned on this device. So you want to really set this up on a test bench. I would suggest you don't plug this into a live network. You can't have two DHCP servers on the same network or you're going to have some routing problems. So let's assume you've set this up on a test bench. You're going to plug your computer in with an Ethernet cable to the device, and the WAN port of the WatchGuard is going to be plugged into your current network maybe, or it's going to be plugged directly into a router that you've got that's got internet access. So that's going to be your first initial portion of a setup. I've already put a basic default IP address on this so that I can do this test in our network. But in your scenario, once you've got your laptop plugged in, you're going to go to HTTPS, similar to what I've got, but just a different IP. You're going to have 10.0.1.1 and then colon 8080. All right, you don't need, this will fill in, all these bits will fill in at the end here for you. All right, but that's what you need to be able to access it. All right, so it needs 8080 on the end. And then you're going to come to this login screen. By default, there are two passwords set in your WatchGuard. One for admin and one for status. Status, if you like, is a reader-only model. It allows a user to go in and see the config, but it doesn't do anything else with it. We will change those user passwords later on, but the default passwords, you've got admin is read-write, and you've got the one for status, which is read-only. So here we can go, we're going to log in with admin and read write, so READWRITE. All right, and this is going to log us into our device. So this is what it's going to look like, or fairly similar to you. I've set up a couple of bits so that, like I said, I can configure this. You may have some data traveling through this. I've set my computer up to use this as its default gateway so that we can collect some information and it'll be a bit more useful for you as you go along. So in the front panel, like I said, I'm not going to go through every screen. I'm going to go the screens that are useful in how to get this ready and into your network and ready to go. So essentially, we've arrived at dashboard and front page. Over on this side, or front panel, over on this side here, we are going to have some details about the device, its serial number, the time zone, how long it's been up for, and any other specific information that you've got set up. It's also going to give you some basic logging information. Now let's remember, this is a WatchGuard device. It does not have an inbuilt hard drive if you've got the physical pieces of a tin, the physical hardware. All right, so there is a limited amount of information that this can store. Depending on the subscription services that you've bought, then you may have the option to retain 7 or 30 days of logs up into the cloud. All right, but that's something to investigate. Otherwise, you need to remember that there's maybe only 20 minutes, 30 minutes of logging, depending on how busy your network is. So here in this front panel, we've got the top users. Well, there's only one user because that's my machine. This is all the different locations that they're going to, the policies that are being used, the destination ports, and the top countries. So you get a feel for what is actually happening on your network. Subscription services is the next one that's useful. Now, when you're first setting up your computer, you're going to actually need to register the device. So you'll go to your WatchGuard.com portal login. You will have received a license document, and you would have received some serial numbers. You're going to put the serial number of your WatchGuard in there. All right, and it's then going to walk you through activating it. Once you've activated it, you're actually going to get what's called a feature key. Now, depending on if you're set this WatchGuard up and it's got internet access, it will update itself after a period of time and pick up that license key once it is enabled. If you come into subscription services and you have a lot of licensing issues in here, probably the first thing that we're going to go to actually in this is go to System, all right, and we can actually go to Feature Key. This gives a serial number of the unit and all the subscriptions that are on it. If you come down into this bottom section, we should have here this should be enabled here, enable automatic feature key synchronization. All right, so what you can do once you know that you've got a WAN connection, so your Firebox is connected to the internet, then you can choose Get Feature Key. As long as you've registered the unit in the portal, then you will get an updated license key which will show you everything in here that you need to know. If you're doing this offline, then you in the WatchGuard portal, once you've registered the unit, there'll be an option to download the feature key. So download the feature key and you can now come to the same section. So log in, come into System, go to Feature Key, come down here and choose Update Key. All right, and you can now paste in all of the text from that feature key, and that will add the licenses to this unit so you can do everything that we're going to do in this video. So I would make sure you've got that enable feature key set and you'll be good to go. All right, so let's just hop back here to the dashboard. So in subscription services, as long as your feature key is enabled, you will see some subscriptions that are turned on, and in due course we're going to go through and activate most of these. And it will depend on your subscription. There are two main subscriptions for WatchGuard. There's Basic Security, which is content filtering, intrusion prevention, application control. Those are the key ones in there. Then we've got Total Security. Total Security is what's enabled on here, and that gives us zero-day protection. It gives us some other options with DNS, Watch, and a few other subscriptions as well. So really, the change in there will depend on what license you have bought. Your Firewatch, this is having a look at the applications and information that's traveling through. Again, this is not really part of the video because this is more information gathering afterwards, and there is content on the internet of how to investigate. This is troubleshooting, this is investigating also what applications, what information is running through your network, where it can identify things that are going on or what policies are in action. Then probably the really one that you're going to want to do is come to your interfaces. So again, we will set this up in a moment. I have got the basics set in here, so I am collecting some information. I've connected this to our Aussie broadband service, so you'll see its IP address and the gateway. I've also set a 4G failover on this, which we'll cover hopefully a little bit later on in this video. And this is my trusted port. This is my LAN. These are the optional ports that are on this T45 that we're using that could be configured for other networks if you want them to. So this really sort of gives us an idea of what's actually happening, shows what IPs are on here, whether the status of those is up or disabled, and gives you a good option to just give a basic review of what's happening. And your SD-WAN really is where we, a software-defined wide area network is where we can have multiple connections to the internet at the same time, and we can load balance them or use them as failover, and we should be able to cover a little bit more of that as we go through this video. So your traffic monitor, this is your live output of what is going through the device. So we might choose to look at diagnostics, which will just give us issues, but most people will start with all because this is actually showing all the data that goes in real time, and we can use it to search for an IP address that we know maybe a device is trying to get to, but for whatever instance it's not able to get to. So this is a good way of diagnosing what's going on. So this again won't be covered a lot in the video, but this is a good place to come and see what's happening. You can see there's IPs trying to get into the network and out of the network here already that's being blocked. Your gateway wireless controller, that's if you've got this as a wireless device and you're going to set up some of those bits. And your geolocation is again showing you the traffic that is going through your network, what countries it's going to. And network discovery, if you want to use this and it's enabled in your license, then this will allow you to hunt for other devices on the network as well. And you can set that up to periodically scan if you want. So you'd actually get notifications if a new device that you don't know about has maybe been added to the network. So that's probably our basic view of what's happening in the dashboard here. And our system status isn't so relevant for setting up, but we can see things like our DHCP leases if we've got DHCP running. We can see what sites are blocked. There's some useful information there. So let's probably start to actually drill in to get this all set up. So I'm going to first start as subscription services. This is a place that is going to make sure that we've got everything turned on. Please do remember the principle that this works. Just because a subscription is turned on doesn't mean it's actually active and doing anything. So we're first going to turn them on, and then you use firewall policies to control those actually being implemented and what protocols. What I'm going to first do, we will in a moment, is just set our interfaces. But let's just have a quick look down here. If you want to have this set up with network time, it should be set as default, so it's probably worthwhile just checking that. Most of the other settings in here will already be running and configured for you. Probably one that you might want to just get a habit into here is your configuration file. This is, as you go along, I suggest that as you make changes, you choose or download this file. All right, you can choose it and then download it. This is actually the config of the unit. So if you make a mistake, you can actually go back and obviously re-import it, or you could factory default the unit if you desperately needed to, and then put all of your config back. Your only other one key in here is your users and roles. So this is probably the first place that you want to come to and set actually a useful password. Often we do this part of the way along the program, but do remember, if this is accessible via the internet, then already there is potential, depending on how you have this set up, to whether people can actually already access the web interface of this. I think by default, and we can just check in firewall rules and policies, it's called the web UI. You can only get to this by default if you are on the LAN. So there's less security issues there, but I would suggest that you get into a habit of coming into system, users and roles, and do remember you've got 2 users to change. Please don't forget, please just don't do the admin one. The status one I know is only read-only, but it could give you people a lot of information about your network. So all you need to do is highlight, edit, change the password, and save it, and you're off and ready to go. I'm not going to do that on here because I will factory default this afterwards, but that's probably a good place. So we've already talked about the feature key and your users as a starting point. Then we'll just go to our interfaces. So network and interfaces. This is where we're just going to make sure that we have our WAN set up. We're obviously already connected on the LAN, but you might want to bring that into a different IP range. So we have Aussie Broadband here. It's fiber to the property. You're just going to plug in an Ethernet cable and run it on DHCP to pick up an IP address. Do remember that many times we've maybe asked for a static IP address, and we think that we have to do something special with that static. Normally, if all you've got is a single static IP address, all you need to do is leave your device in DHCP, and it's your ISP, your internet service provider, that will keep giving you out the same IP address. So highlight your interface, choose Edit, and you can give the interface a name because this may have just said external on it. In here, you've got a description if you want to put there. You can choose this and put this in a different grouping. We're not going to cover VLANs, but you could do some VLAN options in there if you wanted to. There are some internet service providers that need a specific VLAN, so you would actually start to set some of that up in here for the WAN interface if you needed. We're just going to leave this as DHCP. If you've got another modem in front of this, maybe you're on VDSL, fiber to the node or something like that, then there are potential issues that you can run into, something called MTU, which is the maximum transmission unit. This is a packet size, and sometimes it can affect the speed of our firewall because you're going through another device. So I'll just talk about that in a moment. This is, you can change on here anything you want to, but it's simple, and we're going to leave it on DHCP. In advance, we have an option to change the MTU. If after you've put this firewall in, you feel that some graphics or images aren't loading very quickly, MTU is often an indication. This is not probably going to happen so much on fiber to the property, but an MTU of 1,500 means 1 gigabit a second. Obviously, when we go through a modem for VDSL or fiber to the node, we won't be getting 1 gig a second. And sometimes it relies on the modem that you're connecting to or the router you're connecting to get the right MTU. You could start to bring this down to maybe 1472, somewhere around about that size, and see if it speeds the options or the loading up for you. So MTU is probably one of the common issues that you run into when we add a firewall into a network, and bringing the MTU down slightly will help. But generally, if you're on those fiber to the node properties, connections. So all you're going to need to do is come in here, you're going to change your IP address, static if you've got a proper IP subnet and range that you've been given, or generally DHCP if you're connecting to a broadband service, and hit save. That will then should give your firewall internet access. Remember to be able to pick up automatic feature keys, to be able to pick up all the signatures and the security updates. This will need to always be able to access the internet. And something that's very interesting, that often when we pick up DHCP, we get our ISP's IP address for DNS, and that can actually give us some issues. So my recommendation is that you go into DNS as this separate tab under interfaces, and you actually add in, so I've added them in Google's. You can maybe use Cloudflare, which I think is 1.1.1.1, or you can 8.2.8.8 or 8.8.4.4 as 2. This means that the firewall will always be able to use Google's DNS and should always therefore be able to get updates and be able to see the WatchGuard licensing portal, which some of the key bits that are going on. So in this instance then, if you wanted to change the trusted is what's called our local network. So we can highlight this, all right, and again we can choose edit. So we have the option in here to have put in an IP address. I would suggest, if you don't really quite know about slashes, what we call a slasher network, then you do have a little Google. There are some nice little tables on there that will show you how it is. Generally, most people will be using what we call a /24. That's a full subnet, so 172.20.22, and essentially 0 to 255. Obviously, you can't use all of those. You lose one at the bottom, so it would be really effectively 1 to 254 as actual usable. But that will actually give you a whole subnet. So /24 is what most people will use. If you need to use something different that's a little bit bigger, that's maybe going to have 2 class Cs, what we call class Cs here, then do go and use the calculator. I think we might have a link for it potentially on the bottom of our website at thetechgeeks.com. If you want to give out IP addresses on your network, I've got this disabled because we have other DHCP servers. You can choose DHCP server, and in here you can set your IP range. So you're going to choose an add, what you're going to start from, maybe you're going to 10, and you're going to add at 200. Remember, if you've got devices like servers or NAS drives or things that want static IPs, you have 2 ways. You can give out these and then give out a set number of IPs like this, and then make sure that either from 1 to 10 is the IP address that you've got one of those devices, because that was outside the scope, or you can choose reserved IP addresses, and here you can put in the MAC address, so that will be on most devices with its all the octets, and it's got colons between it. You can put that in here. I think you don't need to put the colons in it when you put it in here, and you can give it a name. And even though it's then going to pick up an address automatically from DHCP, you will always be assigning it the same IP. Probably not quite totally relevant in the security side of things, but you do want to get this right. So you can set up your DHCP server on here. You can tell it to give out what specific DNS. If you have an Active Directory server on an internal server, then in here this might have your internal server's IP address if it does DNS resolution, so that all your machines on your network work. If not, it will pull the default, which is why we've set that as Google's, and therefore you don't need to add anything extra in here. Again, we have MTU, but MTU is generally not going to be an issue on your trusted or your LAN network because you have probably a 1 gigabit connection anyway. All right, so that probably is a very brief look at those two interfaces. I've got a third interface on here that I've set up for 4G. I've got a Teltonica RUT955 4G router on here. It's again, I've turned the wireless off on it and I've just put it giving out DHCP. So again, all my device here, my WatchGuard is doing is picking up an external IP address from or another IP address from it, and we'll set that up in our SD-WAN routing later on. So there's a little bit of networking knowledge in there, but those are your basics. Some people will just leave it on the default network, which is 10.0.1.xxx. And just make sure that the WAN is set on DHCP, and in most instances that will work. Otherwise, you may want to just set that up to match your network. So that's probably our main setting that we've got is in interfaces. And now we can hop down to our subscription services. So in subscription services, our access portal, I'm not going to enable that. That's the ability for you to be able to, and again, it's on your licenses, to be able to integrate certain logins so people can VPN in essentially or use zero-touch networks, so you can just basically have a page and it will be able to go to Salesforce or maybe Office 365 from a web page and actually give some level of protection in front. This is, we're really looking at the moment from the LAN to the WAN side of things. So application control is our next port of call. This will probably be enabled by default. It hasn't been put on any policies, and we'll talk about policies in a moment. But you'll see that there's a general policy up here, and it's basically looking at proxy services, tunneling, crypto. So we can choose edit on this. And probably the best option, you've got all of these different categories. We can change these categories to be blocked or allow or needing authority. Best option in here is to just show all configured applications. And this will show you where we've made changes. So you see in the default policy, we've basically got all of those things like Tor, peer-to-peer, things that are voiding the firewall, other options of ways around it. So this is probably a good starting point, and you can build this. You can create your own policy after this by adding, and then you might decide that you're going to block social media or you're going to block other things like that. So that's a different way of doing it, but I would suggest that you at least start with the global policy, which will give you some level of protection to start with. So we will apply that to firewall policies shortly. So at the moment, although it's active, it's not actually doing anything for any of the traffic that's leaving my computer. APT blocker. So this is advanced persistent threats. These are ever-changing attacks, if you like. These are maybe viruses that we don't know about yet. Often we see advanced persistent threats called zero-day threats. These are cryptoware. These are encryption type of things that are morphing all of the time. So what happens with a firewall like this? Well, we're first going to enable it. This is generally in attachments. So if we see somebody downloading something, now it needs to be unencrypted, and we'll hopefully have time to cover HTTPS inspection in this video. But we have some things around this that we've got to be aware of. We need to be able to unencrypt this traffic to be able to use something like APT blocker and some of the other things like antivirus. Obviously, if you go to an HTTPS website, that's actually encrypted between your machine and the end device that you're connecting to, the server or website. The firewall can't see inside it. So there is a limitation there of what the firewall can do. So we'll talk about and hopefully get some of those rules set up. But APT blocker will see a download or something come through the firewall that it doesn't know about and feels that it might be a threat. It will then isolate that, stop the download from happening. It will then upload it to the cloud, WatchGuard's cloud, run it, inspect it, see what it's actually going to do. And if it thinks it's safe, as a result, it will then let it through. So you now have some options of what you want to do in this. And my suggestion would be that to start with, you maybe just work on high options, and you leave these to be on allow. Why would I do this? Because suddenly you're going to put a firewall in a network that maybe hasn't had one, and you're going to be hit by things that don't load anymore or don't work in the way that you want to. So start at a moderate or just the ones that, when this means high, this means that it has been categorized as a high level of potential. And so at least you're adding in an option. And then what you can do over a week, let it settle. If you've got no other network problems, then you can maybe bring the medium option in. At least you're putting the alarms and the logs in here. And so as a result, you're going to get some information in the log files of what's going on. So I'm just going to save that. We can look in notifications if we want to. You can do an email if you want an email to be sent when one of these is triggered. And maybe you've got regular files, maybe you want to exclude PDFs for some reason, or specific files that get sent around that are graphics, then you can put those in there. So there is some control over this. Policies in here, none of this is applied to anything, as you can see at the moment. So again, we've ticked it, but no protection is in place. And advanced, this is where we're going to choose our region, because it is going to send data out of your network. So in this instance, we're going to send this to Europe. You can have options to run on premise security servers to do this if you want to. So I'm going to save that. So my data is going to leave Australia here for Europe for inspection, but it's only going to be the stuff that it thinks is a high level of threat that it doesn't already know about. So it's a way off of whether you are allowed to do that or not with the type of data this is going to stop. Then we have botnet detection. Botnet detection should be enabled by default. What are botnets? Botnets are command computers. Often little pieces of malware have been installed on somebody's computer, maybe from a software download that they've done because they wanted to rip things off YouTube or something, and maybe it's got a little bit of malware that hasn't been inspected by an endpoint piece of software, or you didn't have a firewall in. And basically every now and again it makes a conversation back to that controller server, and the botnets are generally used to do denial of service attacks, try and bring networks down. And so the idea is that controller then requests all of the servers, all of the machines that have been infected, to target a specific IP address or network and flood it with data. So this is basically going to inspect, and it's going to see any of that type of traffic and drop it. You'll see in here that as part of the update server, this is really automatic for all of these, that every hour it's going to go and pick up new updates. So this is why we buy subscriptions for these type of firewalls, because every hour we are getting updates of threats that are known from millions of devices around the world. DNS Watch. So we're going to enable this. What is DNS Watch? DNS Watch is another way of inspecting whether things are valid. We can often have an email that's sent to us that has a link to say you must reset your Facebook password or whatever. But when we actually click that link, it takes us to a completely different website, but it was formatted to look like Facebook. Services like WatchGuard, DNS Watch, and some of all of our other content filtering are starting to inspect whether what we are clicking is going to the site that we should do. So I would again encourage this as an extra level of protection you have in here. And you have an option to choose where you want to enforce this. And maybe you've got a network that's got servers on it. On one portion of this, you may decide that you don't want to enforce that. And you can exclude that. You could choose just do it on certain interfaces if you want to, but we're going to enforce it across all interfaces because that's the best way in this initially let's get this out of the box and running stage. And you can see that this is now already operational and running. Again, we do need to enable this in some of the functions and policies to make the best use of it, but we'll get to that stage first. Our gateway antivirus. All right, so again, this is sort of ready out of the box. We can choose the policy that it is actually enabled on. So antivirus is enabled on here. And again, we're choosing what's actually happening and what's going on with this. So when a virus is detected, drop it. When a scan error occurs, do you want to stop the user getting to your network? to getting to that because an error occurred, or do you want to allow it? By default, it's allow. You may decide that for your network, you want to actually do something else with it, block it or drop it. We have a maximum file size that we can scan because obviously every device, every firewall has a finite amount of memory. And so what do you want to do if the file was too big? Generally, the big files don't have viruses in them because you want to get files and the virus onto somebody's computer, so you don't really want it to be too large. When the content is encrypted, so maybe it's a zip file that's encrypted with a password, maybe we can't unencrypt that. What do you want to do with it? Do you want to block it? So it gives you some control over what you can do, and you can just want to check here that gateway antivirus is enabled. But we'll show you a little bit more. Again, it's all done in the firewall policies. Geolocation. This is one I would suggest you are careful with. All right, because this can have some undesired results if you don't get this the right way round. As you can see, there's the policy is enabled and 0 countries are blocked. What you have to remember is people immediately think that this is going to be used for just inbound and I want to block certain inbound traffic. Remember, out of the box, this is already dropping all of your inbound traffic or everything that has come from an IP address outside of the network that has found your broadband IP and is trying to come into your network. Geolocation for inbound traffic is useful if you've got firewall rules open or ports open for internal equipment. But also, if you don't get this right, you might find that you're blocking people getting to IP addresses that are also in some of those countries. So don't just set this up with Australia and apply it to every rule because I'm in Australia, because a whole bunch of your services will be not in Australia and you'll suddenly wonder why some of your firewall rules don't work. So this is just an extra layer of protection. Intelligent AV, we're going to enable this. This allows us to start using multiple antivirus products built into the firewall. The more obviously that we use, the greater protection that we have. You again can, if there's regular files that travel around your network, then you can actually exclude those from the scanning. But I'm just going to enable now intelligent AV. Intrusion prevention, we approach this in a very similar way to the APT blocker. So we're just going to set this up and enable. I would suggest that you leave it as it is here with these two, but make the changes here. So again, this is something that intrusion prevention, this is about looking at applications that we know could potentially give backdoor access into your network or that maybe are malicious in some ways. Now, this is very easy to identify things incorrectly. This can often happen with remote control software, maybe things like TeamViewer, and those can get very quickly put into the wrong categories. So my suggestion is you leave this on full scan, which does use some of the CPU of the device, but does give you the best protection. Critical, again, this is ones that have been identified as pretty much 100% vulnerabilities. High, again, is that in that high percentage of a likelihood. I would then choose action to be allow for medium and low. We've got logging turned on. We can then just check that our network runs okay and we don't have any issues. And we can come back and we can increase this level. Ultimately, if you could get down to low, that's fantastic. In many networks, too many things are unidentified and you spend a lot of time doing exception rules. But let's see if we can get down to minimum in due course. But I would choose critical and high at the starting point. We can then choose what policies we want to assign it to. I would let it choose every policy for this moment in time. You can come back and tidy that up later. And that has now enabled our intrusion prevention. We've almost got through the list here. Network discovery, like I said, you can enable this. I'm not going to do this because I've got other machines on the network that I know about, but you could enable this and it will then set up a periodic scan and will start alerting you if new devices are added. Quarantine server, this is probably not relevant for you unless you are doing some sort of email filtering and you have got the other add-on software for the WatchGuard firewall running on a local server. So most people probably won't use that side of things for the quarantine server. And many people won't use the spam because you can use this, if you've got IMAP or POP3. Many people are not using IMAP or POP3 anymore. They're using something like Office 365. If you are, then do turn on spam blocker. It's going to intercept. Obviously needs to know and unencrypt first, but it will have a look inside those mailboxes for you. But a lot of people probably don't use this portion very much, or it's a little bit more specific. So I'm not going to enable it in this side of things. All right, now we've got network access enforcement. So if you have bought the total security bundle of WatchGuard, you'll get some, I think they're called EDR Core now. So there are some so this is part of sort of threat sync and alerters. And so you can actually install you get a number of them free with the box that you can install on everybody's computer. It is a very limited endpoint antivirus product. The idea is more to alert to vulnerabilities that it's finding. And you can use this in network access enforcement here to actually make sure that Mac or Windows machines on your network have this installed before they're allowed to connect to VPN. So that's a good way of adding in extra security if you've got users that are connecting to your device remotely and you want to know that they have some level of protection installed. I'm going to leave this off. It's not relevant. I don't have VPN users in this side of things. And then we have web blocker. This is our content filtering, where we're going to have a look at the websites that people are actually going to. So you can name this what you want, web block default. And now we can choose which of our categories we want to block. This is only going to work for HTTP. We'll hopefully have a time to have a little look at HTTPS, but this is only working for HTTP sites. For HTTPS, we now need to be able to unencrypt them. It will deal with the first request, so just not trying to get too technical. But when we go to an HTTPS website, we do start the initial request visible to the firewall. Once the connection has arrived at the server and back, then we do have a little bit of an issue at that point, because it does become protected and we can't see inside it. So we will get an initial request, but we couldn't see if they then went on to a proxied site that allowed them to get around the firewall. So you may decide that you want to set up this policy to block some of these options. So maybe you didn't want to allow some adult material in here. Maybe you wanted to block out race hate. Maybe you wanted to block out certain drug or guns, those type of things. Then you can choose your options in here. All right, and you can then choose it to be, for instance, to be denied, and you can get a whole idea then at this point of show categories that are denied, and we're building up a new policy that has certain things of control in here. And you can have multiple policies, and you can apply multiple policies to different users or different IP addresses. So this is probably something here that you want to set up in due course. So let me just put this one back probably before we get into some problems with this one. All right, but let's have a quick look at all categories. We can choose things that are going on in here. So maybe let's say illegal and unethical. We can choose this one, and let's put this as a deny. We have an option here to pop up an alarm page. So as they try to get to the web page that's blocked, it will pop up a page, and it will then say, this is blocked, but if you have a passphrase, put that in. So this could be quite good in a work environment or a school, so you can actually override that, and you can set a phrase in here of whatever you'd like. That's let me view it. Let me view it. All right. Uncategorized is probably one of my key ones, and I file this as the most significant. At the moment, by default, this is when a URL is uncategorized, allow it. I would probably use at least one or maybe deny. Why is that? Most of the scam websites, most of the ones like I've received an alert from the Australian Federal Police that my speeding ticket hasn't been paid or whatever, those are generally for websites that have been probably registered with inside 24 hours. As a result, most of these online systems have not been able to categorize them, not being able to work out what they are, and sometimes then our users click on them and they get through the system. By doing this, it at least says to people, this website could be malicious. Are you sure you know where you're going to? So I'd make sure you've at least got that there as warned. So let's carry on. All right, this is going to apply it to some of our content filtering. And I would just to let it accept the standards. All right, and this is going to ask us what policies would you like to create. I'm not actually going to create any policies, and we'll probably apply this on a little bit later on. So we have really been through here now all of our applications, all right, and we have made sure, so all of our subscriptions and made sure that they are all active. Now it comes down to what are we actually going to do with the firewall, and how is this all going to work. So what we might just actually do in a moment is now go into firewall and policies. So this is the default set of policies that you get when you first log in and set a firewall up, a WatchGuard firewall. And really, for any firewall, you need a basic set of rules for it to work. You need DNS, because without DNS, you can't resolve anything in the internet. All right. You need HTTP. So you can get to HTTP websites, but generally most websites are HTTPS, so you'd actually need an HTTPS proxy as well. And so out of the box, these we already have. Now this one here is one of the extra policies that's been created as we've gone through and done subscriptions, and we're probably going to go through and tidy some of these up as well. If you use FTP, then you might want to use keep your FTP policy in here. I'm going to delete it. It's not one that really I need on my network. I don't have any. I'm going to use my catch-all at the bottom here. So maybe it's just useful. The rules go from the top to the bottom. So we process downwards. So you can reorganize these by using this disable auto order. And as you probably get more used to the firewall, you'll probably want to use this. So I'm going to turn this on now. This allows me to actually move up my policies, because if the firewall finds a policy that matches, it will stop. It won't go all the way further down. So I'm going to just remove FTP proxy because I don't need it to look inside any FTP. I'm going to be happy to catch it down here. So I can now choose action, and I'm going to delete that policy. So we've now got an HTTP policy here at the top. So let's have a look inside our HTTP policy. We can highlight this and choose, edit it like that. And look, here we go. This is from my local network out to the internet. I've got intrusion prevention running, and I've got Tor blocking as part of it, which is built into it. We have got other things in here which we're not going to cover today. We can enable bandwidth management, and again, restrict how much happens with inside this rule. Remember, although this is an outbound rule, this also reflects your downloads because the traffic originated from your local network. So my computer makes an outbound connection to a web server that then I could pull my download from. I don't make a request and then it's pushed from that web server. So we need to think of these rules as still inbound traffic, but not inbound traffic that originated from the internet. So I'm going to apply my firewall rules or my bandwidth rule to something that leaves my network. So this would also allow me to manage something like a download that was happening. All right. So there's a few things in here that are interesting. By default, firewall rules in a WatchGuard aren't set to log. This is probably to restrict unuseful stuff appearing in the logs, but it also makes it very difficult when you come to troubleshoot because you've forgotten to enable logging. So the first thing I would do here is make sure that you enable logging. That means that every URL that is requested in this policy, we're actually going to find and keep a track of everything that's going on, so we can look back through those log files and find it. So I may just save that now, and at least I know I've made that change. Let's go back into our policy again. You can change where this is restricted to if you want to, but we're just talking about how to get your firewall up and running in this stage. SD-WAN, all right, we haven't really done anything with SD-WAN. We might have a chance to quickly look at that, but that's where we choose if we've got multiple connections, what happens with this. Like we saw before, I've created an Aussie broadband connection and a 4G connection, and we can get it to failover. Application control, again, I'm now going to enable my global policy that we had in place. All right, and we should be able to see here that these are the options that are being blocked. So this is giving, now we're starting to enforce, for people who go on HTTP sites, we're now actually starting to enforce some level of protection. Geolocation, like I said, you may decide to not have this on. If you do go and set some policies or some blocked sites because you're doing an inbound rule and forget, you will have, and you just added them to the global, then this web rule will actually suddenly be blocked from, users will be blocked from accessing the internet if they're not in one of those countries. So you might want to turn that off. Traffic management, again, we're not using, but this is where we can restrict some of the speeds and things that are going on. Proxy action, this is where it gets a little bit more interesting of what's going on. All right, we've got our default HTTP policy, and like I said, you can create multiple of those policies. We created one that was just, I think it was illegal or illicit or law enforcement stuff. So that's the one that we're using as our default at the moment. So we can choose lots of other bits in here. I'm not going to cover all of this because it's not relevant. It's about how you tidy this up. But really, in here, this is about how we are protecting or how we're using it. We've got our options to change what the deny message looks like. And in our web blocker policy, this is our default one that we created. And we could go and create some new ones. We then have gateway antivirus, so we've enabled this. It can be different from each rule, as you could see. So we could change this one. And our proxy and alarms, we don't need to send an email. We've actually set logging on. And APT blocker, we want APT blocker to be enabled on here. So we've now created our first safe rule, if you like. This is right at the top. This is if you are going web surfing using HTTP. So you can actually see here these little icons in here that show we've got logging turned on. We've got, I think this is application control, and this is a proxy rule. A proxy rule means that it's going to intercept the traffic, check it, and do something with it. All right, this rule here has been created surplus because of how I created all my other policies. So I'm actually going to remove this one. HTTPS we'll come back to and check on a moment on that. I will just quickly test now and see what that's actually going to do and see whether I can show you that as we go along. All right, well, we'll come back to that and I'll work that through with you in a moment. All right, so you can scroll these out a little bit. So this type of rule here, all right, is in place for our authentication to override our rule. Remember, we gave it an option that we could do a password override if the site was in our block list. And the certificate portal here is really interesting and really important. So let's cover that because that will allow us to come back to our HTTPS proxy. When we make a request to an HTTPS secured website, it becomes encrypted. And because it's encrypted, a firewall cannot look inside that traffic. It can only look at what initially happened. And so that could mean that we could be downloading viruses, the website could be compromised, and the firewall can't actually do anything about it. So we need to add in a level of unencryption. And this is really called a man-in-the-middle attack. So what's actually going to happen, and if it doesn't matter any website that we go to, let's go to Apple's website on here. We have a certificate. We can see this is protected, all right, and the connection is secure, all right, and a valid certificate has been issued for it. In fact, if we click on here, we can see how this certificate has been issued. So when we're in this scenario, we can't unencrypt this from now on. So what we want to do is, what we have to do is create a man-in-the-middle attack. What this means is that when I actually request Apple, firewall is going to intercept it. When it intercepts it, it is going to create a HTTPS tunnel between the device, my computer, and the firewall. It's going to unencrypt the traffic so it can see inside it, and then it will create a new request from the firewall to the website, in this instance, Apple. That allows us to see the traffic that's inside, but our web browsers are pretty clever now, and they'll actually see that that's happening because the certificate of the site that we're going to will be different, and we will get an insecure. It will actually say the site you're going to is insecure. Are you sure you want to continue? Well, we don't want all of our devices to do that. So what we need to do is install a trusted certificate on our local computer. And that does mean that for every device on your network that needs access to HTTPS and you want to give some level of security, then you really want to install the HTTPS or the certificate. That could be on an Apple or an Android device, it could be on your servers. You can write some exception rules to get around this. And this is the bit that most people probably miss out in securing their firewall. So I will want to just cover this for a few moments before we just cover the last bits, and then really we're done out of the box. So many people will just disable this rule. So we can just highlight it, or we can go into it, and edit it. And if you want to disable a rule, then we can just do this and save it. That means we're not going to inspect any HTTPS traffic. All right, and that's also a good option if you want to see whether firewall rules are causing you some problem. So I would probably start with this turned off at this point in time. All right, get the rest of your network working, and then come back to look at that. You'll see that it's just now taken away our rule here for our certificate manager. All right, so HTTPS is something that will cause you a little bit of pain in setting up, but is really worthwhile pushing through, because once you've done it, you can now see so much more information that's going on your network, and it will be much easier for you. So let's just put that rule back in play. All right, and let's look at the certificate manager. So what we need to now be able to do is get our certificate. So if we say 4126, so what we're going to do is we're just going to copy this, and we're going to paste this in here. This is the IP of your firewall, and you're going to put 4126 and just remove the S of the HTTP. And this is our certificate. So you can download this once, you can put it on a USB key or whatever you want, and you can now travel around a load of the devices. So once we've grabbed this, we can now open it, and it will give us this information, and it's going to install it. I think it can be going in the local machine and allows it to run. I think it will put it in the right store, but there are some instructions here of where to actually put it. I'll let it just find the right place and add it into the certificate store. So you need to repeat that on each computer that you want to have HTTPS running for. This now means that when my device makes an HTTPS request, all right, and we've turned HTTPS filtering on, now what's actually going to happen is it is actually going to be able to create a tunnel just to the firewall, and the firewall will then unencrypt it, look inside it, and give us some level of protection. And our web browser won't give us any hassle. It won't even pop up that we've done something that we shouldn't have. So that is really worthwhile doing. That then allows us to go into our HTTPS rule, turn on our logging, our key thing there. We can now do all of our same stuff as before, turn on application control. All right, because that can use the same policy. I'm going to set geolocation to off. Traffic management I'm not worried about. Proxy action. All right, so we can actually do some extra stuff now inside this. We can exclude sites down here, which is probably one of the first things that you want to actually think about doing. So that maybe there's some banking websites or stuff like that that you don't want to have the unencryption happening for. So we then can choose a different web policy if we want to. All right, and we can choose this option in here about inspection, and this is probably the most important one for me, because we don't have to inspect everything, because HTTPS unencryption is going to cause us some level of CPU hassle on the device, and as a result our internet connection will be slightly slower, and in some instances it can be really heavily slow. So you want to remember, what do I want to inspect? So if we've got websites that are blocked, then we've already assumed that they're blocked, so we don't need to inspect them. If we've got sites, so for instance, let's go back here and go, we haven't set any on here for only inspect. We might want to have a go and say, right, I'm going to allow something like adult material. I don't want to block adult material on my network, all right? But I do want to know that possibly in some portions of adult material, not trying to over-categorize this or pigeonhole it, there is potentially a greater likelihood for pop-ups and other options that could well take me to other sites that may be malicious. So what we could actually now choose is we could select all of these, and we could actually choose this to inspect. So now, although I've allowed this policy, we are now going to be a little bit more highly cautious of going to that site, and it's actually going to now inspect it, so we'll unencrypt it. It won't bother about any of the other sites, just these sites that I've set up. All right, so I'm just going to save that. It'll probably take us back to the original screen. I like to make sure that I've done this as I go along. All right, so in our proxy action, all right, we obviously have gone into our web blocker, and we can now see we've got sites here that are inspected. You do want to probably have a look here. Like I said, I would probably now always inspect unencrypted. Uncategorized. So now we get an extra level of even more protection in here for all of those uncategorized. So you could not, like we said before, not worry about blocking it, but at least we are inspecting it. And you could now create some extra policies in here which will give you some level of control, change how you maybe have just a policy that's slightly different in there. And our proxy action and our general, these are all set as our defaults. You can now see our web blocker is on. All right, we do have some options here to look for TLS compliance. If you're worried about certain certificates, then you might enable that as well. But we now have a very basic option here of this being secure. It is warning us that it wants to look for updates of trusted certificates, so we follow that through and enable it, and it will give us an extra level of protection now. So we're now at the point that we have a policy that gives us a whole bunch of protection that we need. And that's probably the key area in here, is to remember to set up what channels you want to inspect. If you're not blocking them, don't check everything. Let's assume that the news sites are fairly safe. But if you want to have a category or option here for web blocking that's more open, let's inspect it. But that will mean you'll get a pop-up the first time saying this is not trusted. That's a good reminder that you need to go and download the certificate like I've shown you. You can turn scheduling on if you want to, and we do have some advanced options which we're not going to cover in here. So we've got all of our settings. As we said, we've set our application policies on. So let's just save this rule. And now we've really covered the two main protocols for our firewall. We can see our loggings on our application control. We can see our override is in, our certificate management is running. And this is our portal. We can restrict this to only specific IPs if you want to make sure that something else in there it can only be got at from certain IPs, or you can set this up so it's accessible from the internet as well, but maybe to only certain users. Then our DNS policy. Our DNS policy here is all good. We've got logs setting on here. Our application control, we're going to set to our global policy. We're not going to have geolocation on it. And that's really all that we need to worry for our DNS. That's going to be inspecting traffic as it goes through. Ping, again, you couldn't turn off ping. You can enable it from the WAN interface as well. In many instances, I like to have the external added on there, which would be any external, because I do like to see my firewall. Some of you, for your policy, you might not like that to happen. Ping, we can have a look in there just in case something untoward is happening. My global policy, I'm turning off. So we're coming down here now quite quickly to the bottom. Our firebox management here is if we're using the WatchGuard tools. And then our last rule here is what I like to call our catch-all. So as we said, we've run down here. So say we've got a VoIP phone All right, our VoIP phone is going to be using port 5060 for UDP outbound. It doesn't catch this rule. It doesn't catch this rule. It doesn't catch this rule or this rule. It will end up at this rule. All right. So this one we want to make sure that has a lot of our policies enabled on it, because at the same time, this is where everything else is going to arrive. So our geolocation again is going to be turned off, and you could do advanced management and everything else. Like that if you want to. So that gives you a good overview of everything that is there to get this going. The only thing we've really not covered quickly is SD-WAN. So we can have our multi-WAN set up. We've got our two interfaces set up in here. And we've set them as a failover, but you can set them as round robin, which means it uses sends some traffic down one, some traffic down another. All right. And what do you want to do with these if it fails back? Do be aware if you're using this in something like a round robin, all right, that you can get into a little issue with what are called sticky sessions. Sticky sessions are where it can end up sending some of the HTTP requests down one link and some of it down another, and as a result, you end up like with two requests to the same banking site, all right, and as a result, the connection can keep re-asking you to log in. So you do want to just make sure that you get that right in the way that you configure this, so it does it the way that you need it to. So I'm going to leave this as failover. We can then come to SD-WAN and create a new SD-WAN policy. And we might call this failover. You can add our two interfaces in here if we want to. All right, here are our two interfaces. All right, what do we want to do? We want to measure on loss. How do we want the connections to fail over? Really, everything we want. Now, that's okay, but we do need link monitoring. If we don't have link monitoring, then this won't know what's actually going on. So we're going to choose link monitoring and adding. All right, so down the Aussie broadband and the 4G connection, we want some sort of link monitoring to go on. I don't want it to ping just the default gateway, because the default gateway potentially is only 60 centimeters away from my device. So I actually do want this to look at something else. So maybe I'm going to get this to ping Google's servers, and how often do I want it to happen, and require accessible probe for all targets. So I could put multiple targets in there if I wanted to. And I'm going to do this on this interface here as well. So I'm going to choose add, and I'm going to put this here, because I want something that's a little way outside of my network to know that it works. So I've now got this SD-WAN rule set up, and I've got my link monitor. All right, so I know whether these are online. I can now go to my firewall policies, and I can start to do some clever stuff. I could take my web proxy here, all right, and I can choose my SD-WAN, and I can say I want to choose failover. And now what do I want it to do? All right, I actually want it to fail over if Aussie broadband fails to go to my 4G connection. And that's really super simple and easy, and it now allows me to have failover of what's going on in there. We can now choose what I was talking about, sticky session, if you want to, if it's relevant for you. And a sticky session will override, I think maybe there's another policy that I've missed here, but you really want sticky sessions to be set up in your multi-WAN so that it will always keep sending the same connections over that same link, and we won't lose that if we're on a banking website. So you can tidy that up a little bit. You can have options in here if you don't want to do, you can have one that says always, you could set up an SD-WAN rule that was for everybody always accessing Office 365, and it went down one specific connection, and if that failed, it would fail over. And now we can sort of do some clever load balancing in here as well. So hopefully that just gives you a run through. This is how to get it secure. We've taken about 1 hour and 3 minutes. Probably some basic information could be stripped out of there. Maybe you're at about 45 minutes of how to put this in your network and secure it. If we go to dashboard and we look now in our subscription services, they're all enabled. We can see all of the things we're getting, any alerts if there's any viruses in there. I've not enabled spam blocker, but we can see things that are going on. What's being scanned? Have we found anything? if we look in our interfaces, we can see the traffic that is actually going through the network and how that's going, and did things fail over while we were testing it. So that is really our simple run through. Plenty more bits and pieces that you can learn in here, but hopefully that gives you a start of how to get your WatchGuard secure. Out of the box, we've covered web content filtering, HTTPS and installing the certificate, and enabling all of the subscriptions and the feature keys as well. Head on over to our YouTube channel. We've got plenty more box openings on wireless and networking devices, how-to guides on setting up more things around your firewalls or point-to-points inside your properties and things like that as well. So hopefully you found that useful, and do subscribe and stay up to date.